is, they've been to Texas and did get back yesterday. And about 6:38 this morning, he called me, and I knew he was in pain, and he told me, he said, I don't know what you're going to tell him, just tell him anything. So I told the early service he won the lottery, he's going to New York to pick the money up. So that's as good a thing as any, but actually something wrong with his shoulder. He don't know how he's hurt it, but he was, I could tell by listening, in a lot of pain. And you that know Eddie and you that don't, believe me, he got to be something wrong for him not to be here on Sunday morning. Even if his shoulder was hurting, but he just told me, he said he has not yet, unless Teresa's gone. Oh, I see her back there waving. He said if she don't take me, I'll probably take myself. Well, I figured she probably loved him enough to take him to the doctor, and then I saw her walk in. I thought, well, maybe not. But she's got the phone though, just in case she does. But do pray for him, please, and because I don't know what the problem is. I've gone through rotator cuff, and if it's that, it's certainly as bad as anything you ever want. It may not be the worst thing in the world, but it's as bad as anything I'd rather have any surgery I ever had. I'm kind of like my son and my son's father-in-law. He had it done on his shoulder right before I did, and he said, told the doctor, if I have to have it again, just take the arm off, because I ain't going through it no more. It's literally can be that terrible. He did want me to remind you of a few things, and they're all on the bulletin and inside the bulletin. First of all, the linemen, welcome down. We have several, I think, of the linemen that are here with us this morning. It's a whole new group come in. As you know, they'll be 15 weeks in the school here in Trenton, and we're just tickled to death when they come and visit us, and we try to do things for them. So this Tuesday night at 6 o'clock, we will have, as usual, our welcome dinner for the linemen, all of them who want to show up. Sometimes some family members may be with them at that particular time. And what they need now is desserts and volunteers to help set up and clean up and all that stuff. And so if you want to be a part of that, if you open the bulletin, it says on the back, but if you open it up, it's kind of in the middle. There's 2 or 3 things where you can check there that you'll bring a dessert and you'll come by and help set up and maybe clean up. Then below that, there's 2 new classes that are starting. These are just a couple of day classes, Growing as a Believer, and then Discovering Your Spiritual Gifts. And the dates are there, October the 11th and 18th, and October 25, and November the 1st, and November the 8th. So one of them for 2, one of them for 3. So if you want to be a part of that, and these may be at the homes, I guess, and that just helps them plan for what they need to have you there. So do that. And then finally, there's a place to add if you want something on the prayer list. And I'm sure that we all have something we could put there from time to time. If you want to look, and I'll be talking from John chapter 14 in just a minute. But if you want to look and you open that thing up, you see all the prayer people that are on the prayer list there. And we know that that's certainly not all of them. But there's a lot of needs. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of things going on. And Brother Eddie called me, as I said, about 6:40 this morning. First of all, it is flattering to know that he feels like he could call. He did say, if you can, I'll call somebody else. So some of you, somebody else's, I should have said call them. But it's been a long time since I've been up here. I'm usually outside greeting and watching service on TV. So this is a lot different here. It's like watching TV and being a part of it. But I'm not making excuses. Now, Brother Gary Bell just leaned up a while ago and said, is that the first time you've ever had to hurry and get one? No. I had 3 hours on this one. I have had much less time than that before. I mean, you walk into the church and the pastor's wife says, well, Joe's not going to be here today. Can you? And you think, well, wait a minute. I don't just have them. I can pull out of a hat and have a sermon. So you don't sit around home and just write sermons, believe it or not. Even if you're a minister, you don't think, well, I think I'll write a sermon. You never know when somebody might say, I'm not able today, and can you do it for me? One thing I do have, I have the gift of gab. One thing Dwayne would tell you if he was here, I chase rabbits. So if you can't keep up with me, I'm sorry. I don't have an outline. I writ some stuff down. I write it, and I can't read it. So it don't do me any good. You don't have an outline in your bulletin, and the reason is I took them out. Eddie said disregard it, but I knew some of you would be mad because you didn't get to see it, so here it is. That's next week's outline. Now, you've all had a sneak peek at it. If I'd have left them in there, you would have worked it out this week and you said I don't have to go. I done know the answers. So I'm not a genius, but therefore I'm not that foolish either. But what I do want to talk to you, and seriously, if I can get that way, it is hard to stand before people knowing the burden that's on your shoulders, not a burden of tears and of hurt and of pain, but that for the next 20, 30, 55 minutes, there's no law that says you have to get out at 12 o'clock. It is not written, thou shalt stay in church till thou art 12. But to stand here and know that for the next several minutes, what I say is going to affect somebody's life. And that's what we're here for. We're not here to just be here. God put people up here, whether it's me or Gary or Wayne or whoever it might be at this particular time. God puts people in place. He puts Brother Eddie here as the pastor. He puts Dwayne as the associate pastor. He puts Jonathan with our youth for a reason. And I did look, and I don't, as I said, I've got old sermons that I've preached and things that I've spoke on that I could probably dug up and rehash them. And to be honest with you, I've used John chapter 14 because Lord knows I've had a bunch of funerals and that's one of our favorites. Now, I'm not going to talk about it today because I say we're dead, but I'm going to talk about it today because that's where the Lord led me, because I do know that we're living in a hurting world. If we've ever lived in a hurting world, we're living in one now. And Jesus says in the first verse, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. That sounds so simple. It's all I got to do is just trust. You know, if we believe everything like that, and I don't even know what they mean. I'm wearing Adidas today. I guess is how you say that. But what's Nike's slogan? Just do it. Oh, that's so easy. Just do it. Well, the problem is sometimes our heart's just not in just doing it. Sometimes there's things that we cannot do anything about. We think back now over the last little over a week now. For days and days, even here in Chattanooga, our people were predicting that a storm is coming up through the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going to be a big one. They predicted where it was going to hit. And they know that it's always a chance it can change and hit, but they were pretty certain that the folks in southeast Texas or southwest Texas were going to get slammed with a big hurricane. Almost on the one of the anniversary, 10 or 12 years since the big Katrina came through. And I thought about, when they told that, I thought about what a man told us when we went to Ocean Springs and worked on their church, and he'd give us a trailer, his trailer to stay in, and he went and stayed with his dad. And he was talking about those hurricanes that come through, and he said, I've always just boarded my windows up, and that's what I did this time. I just boarded up my windows, and I got my tarps, and everything was ready. But he said, I'd always waited them out. It'd never been a problem, but he said, Katrina wasn't a hurricane. Katrina was the devil. And I said, well, what are you going to do when the next one comes? He said, I'm out of here. When they say it's coming, I'm out of here. And they say it was coming for all these days. It was coming. And it's going to be a big one, and it's going to be a hard one. But you know what they could do about it? Absolutely nothing. Oh, they could leave. They could go. And I did learn some things this week. I learned that Houston, Texas is the fourth largest city in the United States. Just wouldn't have had an idea. Just Houston's just out there. 2.3 million people living in that one city or that surrounding area. To put it in kind of in perspective with Atlanta, I think is a big city, and just the population of Atlanta, I think if you Google it, some 548,000 and something. Just a little over 500,000 people that live, and of course, it's a big area, and there's more than that, but the city of Atlanta. And all this is happening, and they're telling you it's going to happen, And they know it's going to happen, and they know it's going to hit, and they know it's going to be hard, and they know, they was even saying it can be up to 4 feet of rain in just a matter of a few days, because it's not only going to hit, it's going to stop, and it's going to sit there. And it's going to back itself up as if it had a mind of its own, and it's going to go back over that warm Gulf of Mexico water, and it's going to pick up more moisture. Now, there's Patrick Core sitting there. He should be doing this. I shouldn't be telling you about it, but say, I've watched him. I know how to tell the weather. It's going to pick up more moisture, and it's going to hit you again. Only it will probably go to the east, and it did. They had everything figured out, except somebody asked, and it was on the news, they asked the mayor of Houston, why did you not evacuate? See, you're always going to get, somebody's going to be asking why. Why didn't you do this? And his answer was that I heard him say, it was too dangerous. There's 2.3 million people here. We'd just get them out there. Where they're going to go? How are they going to get out? Trying to all get out. And I guess it's better to stay there and face the storm, so to speak, in your home and be able to know where you can get to the highest ground than it is to be out in your cars, because a lot of times that's where most people get into the biggest trouble, is trying to run from their problem. Now you say, well, put this in perspective now. I'm going to try to over the next few minutes. What we have is a heart problem. Now I don't mean the strength of our heart and all that stuff. I mean how we face it and what we do. First of all, I want you to look at what Jesus said here. He said, don't let your heart be troubled. Well, God, what in the world can I do about it? A storm's coming. Am I to take from this, you that have ever studied the Scripture, am I to take from this that I've got somewhat control over it? And I find the answer is, he goes on down in near the end there again, in verse, I think 26 or so, he says again, don't let your heart be troubled. He's putting a lot of weight on my shoulders that I got anything to do, because I can't stop a storm. He wasn't talking about that storm. He's talking about the storm that comes in my life and the storm that comes in your life. And that's the reason I know that some of us are going through those storms in our life today. They may be different kinds of storms, but they hit you and when you least expect it, and you don't know what to do about it. I was telling people to the early service it was really a few months ago. It was about 9 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, that it all come to a head. But several months ago, my wife told me, she said, we'd bought a lot next to us, and there was some growth in between, some undergrowth, but we have no trees left since our tornadoes come through a few years ago. And there's some little old oak trees. They're about that big around, and they're, 18 feet tall or so. And they kind of weathered the storm because they was much smaller then. And she said that would look so much better if all that old stuff, and it was honeysuckle bushes and hedge bushes and all that was out. And well, it takes me a while to get in the notion. I don't know about you guys. I just get up one morning and I think, ta-ta-ta-ta, it's time to do it. The notion has struck, I'm going to clean it out. Well, I get my power saw. Now, a power saw ain't the best thing in the world for cutting those old honeysuckle bushes because they grow up in millions of them. But I thought, well, I'll get them out of my way, then I can get to the roots. And I'll dig those roots up with my mattock and my axe. I'm all set. About 5 licks with that axe, I sat down on the ground. And Bruce says, what's wrong? I can't get my breath. I'll get it in a minute. I'll be ready. Ta-ta-ta-ta, back on it. I'm ready. And I get that axe, and about 4 licks this time, I'm back down sitting in that grass. And she said, what's wrong? I said, I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it anymore. I thought, oh man, you're getting old. You're not active. You're not exercising. And I go to the doctor. Well, we want to do a nuclear stress test on you. Every time I think of nuclear, I think of Gary Calloway. He had to have something to do with it because he's a nuclear scientist. But anyway, they do their nuclear stress test. They pump the stuff in my arm. They said, it's supposed to fool your heart. I think my heart's going to be in there just working its little self to death. I don't feel nothing. I go back. They say, everything's fine. You're in good shape. Go on. Well, I go to my medical doctor, and he says, well, you went to your stress test. And I said, yeah, but I don't feel right. you need to see a cardiologist. They never set me up a cardiologist, and the reason probably why they didn't, because 2 weeks later, my plane ticket's done bought. I'm going to Romania if they tell me I can or can't. I'm going to Romania, because I ain't throwing away my $1,800. But they never set me up a cardiologist. And then I go back, because I break out on the back of my arm. Somebody said, well, what did that have to do with your heart problem? It didn't. I just had a terrible claw and itch. Something rash broke out. I think it was from the medicine, the nuclear stress test. Get that stuff out of it, Gary. Whatever causes it. And he says, the doctor, he don't worry about this. He don't care. He's not a dermatologist. He can write me a prescription for anything. If that don't work, come back, we'll send you to a dermatologist. You never saw a cardiologist? I said, no, sir, nobody ever set me up one. What? I said, nobody ever called. Nobody set me up one. And he went all ballistic, not on me, but on himself and on his office. Before I left there, I've got an appointment with a cardiologist. So I go. And he says, well, what they did there, if you got a problem, find it 85% of the time. Ever jump out of a plane? Do you think you got a 15% chance it won't work, or an 85% chance? You're going to think of the 15%. And I thought, well, 15%, that ain't very good odds. That's 15 out of 100 is going to die. Well, we will do an arteriogram just to rule anything out. And if I should find something, I'll fix it while I'm in there. I come out. He says, you had 2 arteries 80% blocked off of the main artery. I have stented them. I'm glad you came back in because you're going to have a heart attack. My problem, I didn't even know I had. It hadn't hit me yet. I was just tired, but it hadn't hit me yet, and there was nothing that I could do. But now somebody has told me now what my problem is, and it's here. And his very words were that when he was going to call my wife. So he told me when I went back to him week before last, he said, if you had had one 90% block, this was quadruple to that one, to have 2 80% block. So I want to tell you something. You find out how important your heart is when a doctor looks at you and everyone has told you, oh, you're fine, go on back and get that axe and go to swinging. And he hadn't said, we might ought to check it just to rule out, and then his final words to you are, you were going to have a heart attack. Not maybe or when, but you were going to have a heart attack. So sometimes we've just got to realize that we're going to have a heart attack that's going to hit us, whether it's in the shape of a hurricane hitting the coast, or whether it's in somebody dying, or we lose our home, or we lose a loved one, or things, we lose a job, we lose all the things that we can lose that we can't really do anything about. We're getting older and we can't do anything about that. Somebody the other day said something about it, and I said, well, when you consider the alternative, it's not too hard on you when you're getting older, but there's a lot of things you can't do. But Jesus said here, do you believe in God? Believe in me too. And we got to believe in that heart that he said, don't let it be troubled. That's hard to do. It's the most impossible thing to do. When you've got a heart problem, it's hard to ignore it. And we got a heart problem. Not because we're lost. We're Christians. We believe. But a lot of us are like that man in Mark chapter 9. When Jesus, this man had a son who was deaf and a mute, and he went to the disciples and said, heal him. Will you heal my son? And man, I don't know what all they done. I don't know. You know, I've been in prayer lines, and I've conducted prayer lines, and I've seen people that have professed to be healed in prayer lines, and I know that God can work just that quick. But they couldn't do anything. They had been with Jesus. They had seen miracles. You know, if there was any hocus pocus videocus to it, they should have known. But they couldn't do it. And he comes back and tells them the worst thing in the world they wanted to hear. You couldn't do it because of your unbelief. But wait a minute, we don't believe? And then he finally tells this guy, he said, if you believe, it can happen. He said, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. I never could figure that out, and I'm not going to stand here today and tell you I have figured that out. How can it be I believe, but help my unbelief? Well, I did what most of us do. I Googled that. You can Google it. Just say, speak to what's her name in there, and ask her. And She'll give you all kind of scriptures on that and a commentary on what it meant to say it. Still don't make sense. How can I believe yet not believe? How can I trust yet not trust? I remember one time, to y'all that, again, you that never seen Brother Eddie, went out of here in the old service, he got, I think it was Tommy and Ricky Hurst and several people one time, and he stood on that old stage and he said, "Y'all catch me." And I remember them looking at each other like, ain't no way we can hold that up. But the point was to trust. I'm going to trust y'all. I'm going to fall off of here backwards, and I want y'all to catch me. It's kind of like at these cheerleader things. Who in the world talks that little old girl into getting up on top of the pyramid? She trusts all those girls under her. You know who's more likely to get hurt at a football game? That little feller. Don't shun away from being cheerleaders. I'm sure they play a great part in football or basketball or whatever, but that little girl gets on top. She ain't too smart. Because she's trusting a lot of people that ain't no smarter than she is, and they just might be having trouble with their boyfriend that day. Or their phone might have been, God forbid, the phone's been taken away. Well, I can't do it. I can't catch you today, honey. And Mama took my phone. We have to trust no matter what. We've got to put our trust somewhere. I cannot put it in myself. I can't handle it. I'm not strong enough. But I've got to know who can and where to go. I was a little bitty feller. My brother was he was my hero, big brother in high school. And there's this guy we picked on. I shouldn't have picked on him, but everybody picked on him, so I decided I'll pick on him one day. Well, this guy was bigger than me. He could have pulverized me, but I'd pick on him and punch at him, and then I'd run to my brother, and I'd get behind my brother. And that's as far as my enemy would go. What I have learned to do is I have to know where I can go and who I can hide behind, and I can always go to Jesus because why? He's the way. He's the truth. He's the life. If I put my trust in Him, I know everything's going to work out, but when it gets to where I can't, when I lose sight of everything. I've often thought, I told this story at the 8:30 to 9, whatever time we have church in the morning. I'm always out there. When I was 9 years old, and we lived up in New Home, Big Woods, Coal City, whatever you want to call it. We were poor. And we knew that we didn't know we were poor because everybody around us was just as poor or poorer than we was. But we were, and what I mean by that, young'uns, listen, I did not have my own bedroom. I had to sleep with my oldest brother, who at this particular time, he was 17 years old. Birthday was on Christmas Day. It was August the 1st or 2nd. My brother had been found when he was younger, the only one of us that could not play sports because he had an enlarged heart when he was a much younger boy. So he learned and loved to fish. And he told my mama when I graduated high school and he was fixing to start his senior year, because you know we just went through August and back then school started right after Labor Day. It would have started tomorrow. When I graduated, I'm going to the Mississippi River. I want to fish in the Mississippi River. What a great thing to want to do. He loved to fish. And he could swim. He could swim as good as anybody needed to swim. But he waited on my daddy, my mama begging him for whatever reason, don't go, son, don't go. They were going to Shell Mountain, down off right there at the foot of the mountain. They were going to run a trot line that night. 3 of them and their families, and they had a boat, and they had a big motor on the boat. He waited on my daddy to get out of the car, and Daddy got, because when his ride brought him home and let him out. And Jack must have been able to work miracles, because if you get money out of my daddy, you could turn coal into diamonds. I mean, it was just hard to do, but Daddy gave him some money. But when he handed him the money, he said, son, some of y'all are going to get drowned fooling with that old boat. Little did he know that that's the last word you'd ever speak to him. 12 o'clock that night, I woke up to a blood-curdling scream of my mama screaming her lungs out. And I knew the brother of mine that wasn't in that bed beside me, something terrible had happened. And as things began to be unfolded and the rescue people came and it was told what happened, my brother was not that far from shore. He was about as far the way they talked as Wayne Moody is from me right now. A good swimmer, but in the dark, murky waters of the Tennessee River around midnight. No light. But the boat, sure enough, had a big motor on the back of it, and the bow was out of and that motor died. And what happens? It went down. The nose just so fast, they all came out. He and another guy didn't think whatever the problem was, but the guy that owned the boat grabbed a board and stayed afloat, was the only one to survive that night. They had the light on my brother. They could hear him. They could see him. But they heard the other guy on out a distance away. So they took the light off. We know where he's at. We'll come back. And they shine it over here, and they're trying to find Keith. And they never see him. We'll go back to Jack. Jack's gone. They find him early the next morning as they dragged the Tennessee River. And it was always thought he had a heart attack. He was a good swimmer. But what had happened? He had lost sight of the light. He had lost sight of the shore. All he could think about was, I'm out in this water and because you don't know how far you are. You don't really know. You can't almost tell, am I closer to that side or this side, or which way should I go? What should I do? But he died that night. And they think maybe because of that thing he had had all this time, a heart problem that never caused him any other problems. He never was sick with it. But he left this world that night because he had maybe a problem with his heart and could have suffered a heart attack because of the panic when he lost sight. We so often lose sight as Christians. We put our faith in God. We believe, as Jesus said, we believe in Him. But Lord, you just don't understand what I'm going through. Yes, He does. He's the only one sometimes that understands. Sometimes family can't understand what you're going through, and you can't understand what they're going through. We can't put ourselves inside the other mind and inside the other heart, but that's where Jesus said, I will be in you because the Father's going to be in me. And when we get to that place that we can realize that we're all wrapped up and tied up and tangled up in Him, that He's the one taking the brunt of the storm. He's the one that is the way. He's the truth and He's the life. And if you would have it, He's the light. So you should never lose sight of it, but we do. I'm only telling you this because I have lost sight of it, and I know it's easy for you to do when we're going through those things that we just can't control, even though we've been told how and we've been told who, but we can't do it because the world's telling us you don't need that anymore. You're able to do it yourself. God created man just a little lower than the angels. We need to man up. You don't need to confess any problems. You don't need to say that you got any problems, because all you just need man up. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps and do it. Those poor people in Houston, Texas could have pulled boots all day. The water was still over the boots. They could have put on waders if they wanted to that come all the way up to here, but the water came over here. They could have done everything they could do, but they're ending up on top of their houses and on top of cars, or finally panicking and thinking if we can just make it out of here, and they're swept away by the water and they're found later. Sometimes some of them is several in a vehicle because they tried to run. We can't run from our problems, but we can run to the one who can solve our problems. And that's what we as Christians so often forget, is that's who we've got to put our trust in. Not the guys who are going to fall off the stage, because even back then, my dear friend, Brother Eddie, never asked me to come up there, because I'd say, I'd have been Lucy with the football on Charlie Brown. You're going to move that ball again. Oh, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'd have got Eddie back for all of his wrongs he ever done to me, and that's a sermon for another time. But he trusted him. It doesn't matter who we trust. If we start trusting in man, man will fail. Y'all know me. I'm as political almost as you can get. They call me a politician. I tell them I am not a politician. I am a public servant. Because a politician's when you're trying to get elected, a public servant's when you fool them and they did. Don't put that, edit that out. Don't put that on TV. Show last week's program. Do something. But I don't, we want to put our trust in and to beat it all. And I don't care which side you're on. Somebody caused that hurricane. Yeah, God did. My wife asked me one time, she said, I wonder why God put that eclipse up there. I said, well, I don't know. I'm simple-minded. God put the universe in motion, and at one time or other, the moon's going to come between the earth and the sun. We're going to have an eclipse. I don't know if it's anything we got to really look for God in it. I don't know if that's what happened on the day Jesus was crucified. Here I am chasing rabbits, but, when Jesus was crucified, it got dark in the day, and I don't know. I guess it was an eclipse. I don't know. I don't care. All I know is he was hanging on a cross for me. So that if I would believe in him and trust in him, I'd never have a problem, I'd never have a storm, I'd never have a heartache or a heart attack that he wasn't in control of and he knew better. Now, our problems change as we get older. I remember sitting in a little old cafe out in Tracy City, Tennessee one time, and this little boy, and I watched a lot of kids grow up out there. I was there for about 12 years on that route that I ran. And I ate dinner every day, same place. I was going to eat it at another place, but right before I started running, it burned down. I didn't have much choice. So I got to go into this place, and I watched kids grow up, and this little boy sitting in there one day, and he had been planning his birthday party. He was having a wonderful time, going to take all my friends bowling. We're going bowling on my birthday. So he's looking forward to this. Weekend's coming, bowling trip, all your buddies. And then the next day he comes in there and he sits down and he looks up almost with tears in his eyes and said, Mama, I don't want to go bowling. She said, well, why? You've invited all your friends and you've been so looking forward to this birthday party. He said, Mama, I might not roll a strike. Now think about it. Let that sink in. This is a 6-year-old boy that the worst problem he's got in the world is he can't roll a strike. Now, I've been bowling several times in my life. I still can't roll a strike. Now, I hit one every once in a while, but it's luck. It's just the right whatever happens down there. And I'm glad for these that let that, if you leave one pin standing, we'll call it a strike, because that's got me a lot of strikes. But that little boy, that was his problem. I might not roll a strike. My problem's bigger than that now. I went up to New Home the other day, and we had a road, well, it wasn't a road washed out. We had a tile that had been in there since back in the late 1950s, and metal tile, corrugated steel, even galvanized, but the bottom had rushed out of it and had begun to squat. Because on top of it was 90 feet of dirt. It's that far down in the ground. It was 220-something feet long. And finally, after those worst hard rains we had, rain went through it and kept washing dirt out till finally the whole thing squatted. So we had it fixed. So I went out there the other day with our road superintendent, and we was going to go down and look at it and make sure, everything. I said, well, let's go. I want to walk through it like I did when I was a kid, when they first put that one in many years ago. So we get up there, and he says, there's a little waterfall right around that bend there. I said, yeah, I remember that. I said, we used to climb down in there all the time. In the summertime, and as I say, I'm not going to tell you how we were dressed because I don't want you to get that picture, but we'd go down in that cold water, and we'd stand there, and we'd just freeze to death. It was so cold. It didn't matter how hot it was. And we'd stand there and we'd see who could hold the longest before we jumped out, and then we'd jump out and we'd jump back in. But he told me, he said, yeah, I'd be afraid now when them rocks fall on my head because it's old shell rock over the top of it. I said, Billy, my fears and my problems when I was a 12 and 13-year-old boy are different than they are now. I said, I'd worry about that rock now, but I had no problem with it then. Back then, it could have been a rock on the head. It could have been, I can't roll a strike. That would have been my biggest problem. But I got bigger problems now. The world's got bigger problems now. The world still needs Jesus, but they're being told every day, that ain't the fix. And somebody comes along, and I hate to speak about somebody I've never met and never going to meet. But let me tell you something. If she comes back around and tells you there's another way, look at Oprah and tell her, no, there is only one way, and that way is Jesus Christ. Because you see, here's how you can lose that vision. She came up in a Christian church believing that Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life. But one day the preacher said, that little verse in there that's tucked away somewhere where God said, for I am a jealous God. Well, wait a minute. If God can be jealous, then He would only be jealous if there was another way, and I chose that way over Him. Now, don't try to make me figure out what He really meant by it, but I'm only taking what Jesus said right here. He said, now I'm going to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house are many rooms, and the King James, many mansions. And I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again. I will receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. That's my hope. That's your hope. That's the only hope we have. I mean, I believe that with all my heart. You may be in here today and think, well, I'm really not sure. I've heard too many people say there's another way. I'm going to tell you there's not. Jesus is the way. And when we stop believing that, Christianity dies, and whatever is out there takes over, and I'm not ready for that yet because I still think and believe with all my heart that He's the way. So then we go down into verse 5, and Thomas says, Lord, we don't know where you're going. So how can we get there? Thomas, I'm telling you, you got to go through me. No man comes to the Father. And church, you say, well, why are you saying that? We're all Christians. Yes, we are. But somebody will be telling you, the media will be telling you, Hollywood will be telling you, all these places will be telling you, there is no God. The Word said, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And there's a lot of fools in this world that want you to believe, because you see, I don't have to deal with it. But I got to deal with eternity, and that's my bigger problem. I can't deal with eternity if I don't deal with God, because I'm going to be lost in eternity if I'm right, and I believe that I am, because there's only one way. There's a direction to go, and Jesus is the way to get to our Heavenly Father and spend eternity, and we don't seem to hear that enough, but we hear the adverse. We hear just the reverse of it all the time. Is all that's old-fashioned. Give me that old-time religion if that's what it takes to get to heaven. It's good enough for my mama, it's good enough for my daddy, it's still good enough for me because it didn't change. Salvation never changed. We're living in a very technically smart world. And I Googled, and you try it. Don't do it now. It embarrassed me. I'm trying to talk to you. When you get home, Google. Listening. How can I get to heaven? I don't know what her name is, but she's got all kind of scripture. Siri, if you've got one thing, but mine ain't a Siri. I call her Siri because I don't know who she is. All these scriptures telling me how to get to heaven. I think, well, she's pretty smart. But all of our technology, everybody else telling me that's just a bunch of foolishness. That's just nothing. There's nothing to it. And yet she's telling me all these, giving me scriptures and commentaries and everything else on how I can get to heaven. Thank God for Siri or whoever she is. She's got more sense than a lot of people I meet every day of my life that don't realize how to get there and won't accept the simplest thing in all the world. You say, well, is it that easy to believe? It is once you believe it. Because when you believe it, you know you believed it, you know you've got it, and you know there's nothing that can take it away from me now. This is mine. I have just one entry into heaven. Now, I know that sounds awful simple, and that sounds like, well, but no, I believe, I'm old-fashioned enough, and I got enough other stuff in me that I believe there's a walk we got to walk, and there's a talk we got to talk. And I'm not always perfect, and I don't intend to be. But sometimes people got to see a little more in me than they see in the world. They got to see some hope. They got to see some trust. They got to see something that they don't see out in the world. Because if we don't see that, we lose sight of that. We're like my brother that lost sight of the light. I don't know the direction now because I lost sight of the light. I don't know how far I am now, and they were coming back to me. I don't know how long. I've often thought that as a 9-year-old boy you would. Well, what was that last minute like? What was that last few seconds like? I'll never know. what went through his mind. But I do know this, and he'd been saved, but I know this. There was a lot of anguish went through his mind. There was a lot of, I don't know what to do and I can't help myself anymore. And when we get to that place, we've got to come back to this. And the reason being, somebody else went down. Philip asked him in verse 8, he said, Lord, show us the Father. Show him to us. If I can just put my hand on him, if I can just shake his hand, I'll be all right. I had a center manager at UPS. It's the funniest thing. I thought of this yesterday, even before this right here. I thought he'd always come up to you. It didn't matter where you was at. He said, shake my hand. Just something he had in his psyche. I guess he'd learned in some kind of a class. I mean, you walk up to him, you're fixing to gripe and growl and grumble, shake my hand. Even if you got your gripe and growl and grumble in when you left, shake my hand. Jesus, if you'll just let me shake his hand so I can lay eyes on him and know. No, we've got to be more like it was in Hebrews. That faith, that trust, that hope. For it is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. See, my wife's at home cooking hamburger steaks, I think. The evidence was when I left, there was froze hamburger meat in the sink. And she was going to the store to buy taters. And she said, I'll make hamburger steak. I'll know when I get home. I believe they're there. I believe she's as good as her word. Unless she got home and got to fooling with that dog. I'm going home to a hamburger steak. The substance of things hoped for. The evidence of things I have not yet seen. That's where we got to be. And that's why Hebrews said, now faith. Now. Not, oh, if I only had faith, it's now. Because I got to depend on God now, in the moment, in the time. Because if I lose sight, you may lose sight. If we lose sight, somebody that don't know the way yet may miss it because there was nobody there to show them the way. The substance of things hoped for. When I was a child, silly putty. Play-Doh, substance. I can just build me anything I want to. I built, like most of you, y'all won't admit it, dinosaurs and cars. And then you'd squish them all back up. And you still had the substance, but you didn't have nothing, so you'd build something else. Later on, that substance became concrete, cement, mortar mix. Glad Mongo's not in here. He would correct me. Mortar mix, that's what you lay blocks with and bricks with. I could picture in my mind, I'm building me and my wife a little house, still standing. I did a lot of it from the foundation up. I said, oh, I've never laid any blocks, but how hard can it be? I mean, 2 or 3 shovels of sand and a shovel full of cement, mortar mix, and mix it up and slap it on there and lay them. Well, man, I started laying my blocks, and they were just about as crooked as you could get them. My wall was running this way. I put a level on it, and it was still running this way. I didn't understand. But I knew what I wanted, and I had everything here to do it with. I had blocks and sand and mortar mix and water and a trowel. That's all I need to get my foundation for my house. Then I know about sawing 2x6s and 2x4s and nailing nails. I can even put on a roof. I can do all that. But I thought, nope, not on this I can't. I called a friend of mine, David Detter. I said, David, I need some blocks laid. He come over and laid them. Knocked some of mine down. How dare he? He said when he got through with it, he said, Robert, I only have one thing I want to ask you. And I wish it had been something more profound. He said, next time you're going to lay some, call me first. Because I had everything I needed, but I didn't know how to do it. Now I got everything I need. I've just got to remember where it's at. Because Jesus went on down, and I'll close. Jesus went on down to say, and I know this has been long, but it's supposed to get out at 12. Jesus went on down to say, when in one place down here, he calls him the counselor, the Holy Spirit. Counselor. What do you do with a counselor? You sit down and they listen. And they give you advice, and they listen, and they give you advice. And it should be the right advice. When he comes, he will bring to your memory everything. Who told me? Gary Calloway when he preached. Gary Bell, that time he preached. Eddie Cantrell when he preached last Sunday. It's good to remember that, and I hope it's from the Holy Spirit. I really hope and I believe that it is. Sometimes I got to know something that they didn't tell me. I got to know what he told me. And he said, when he has come, that counselor who is the Holy Spirit, he will be in you, and that means I'm in you, and I'm in God, so we're all in you. It's like a banana pudding. You got all this stuff. Little boxes of this and little jars of that, and little milk here, a little flour over here, some vanilla wafers, and some eggs to make meringue, and you do it all, and it's delicious. But you can't undo it once you get it all mixed together, and that's the way it is when we get tied up and tangled and mixed up with God. That's where we need to be, it's where we want to be, and that's where we're satisfied and should be. But we need to remember that when we're going through things in our life and storms that are coming our way. Be they hurricanes and another one's coming. Said last night on the news, we will watch it, we don't know. But we think it's going to go here, here, and here, and hit up here. Nothing they can do about it. We can pray and we can ask God to put his hand out there. I will give us that. But what we got to do is we got to believe it ourselves. If that's what it's going to take, we got to believe it ourselves. So I thank you. I hope that I say something in whatever I said that may encourage you. You're going through a storm. You're going through a trial. Go back to this right here when he said, Brenda, don't let your heart, don't let it. But God, no, I said, don't let it. And I'm telling you down here again, don't let it. Don't let it. We can let our mistakes define us. We can let circumstances define us. I like this, and I will close this. We had a gentleman come by, and Coach here knows, I didn't know who he was. I'd told Ruth to go over and talk to Dandy Don at the restaurant before the ball game. She said, well, I can't go over and critique him in front of him. Well, come to find out, the guy he was with at the restaurant was guy's going to be in the box with him Friday night. Well, he talked to the kids before the football game. He even kissed one of them. That was worth the whole world to see the look on that boy's face when he got kissed. Come to find out, this man had played with the Baltimore Colts. He's 68-year-old, 2 years older than I. So, and Don looked at me and said, you know who the Baltimore Colts? I said, yeah, Johnny Unitas and the Baltimore Colts. He said, that's it. That goes way back in there. But anyway, he talked to these kids and he gave them some great advice. He didn't use this much, but you could always tell that's where his heart was. That's where it was coming from. And that's what we need. Not always pounded into us. We just need good sound doctrine and good sound teaching. And we need good sound love from those who are around us. Heavenly Father, I thank you today for